Alright everyone, it's time for Vermont Issues episode 28. The feds are trying to meddle in our educational system. I don't know why, because I think we're number 1 or 2 in the United States for educational rankings, so I'm not sure why they're so concerned. They're under the ESSA, which replaces No Child Left, from W, who was himself half illiterate. And it's no better. It's like, this Obama crap that goes on Common Core, No Child Left, the ESSA, all of the federal educational sort of stuff doesn't really work. Our state has a good enough educational system. We don't need Uncle Sam's help. We don't need Uncle Sam's anything, really. We certainly don't need the feds breathing down our necks telling us how to educate people. If we were on the bottom of the heap, yeah, maybe the federal government should look into what exactly we're doing. When we're significantly above the average attainment levels in the entire country, to the point at which we're easily in the top 3. Why would they have a problem with what are you going to we want to see additional data on how you're going to test students, because of course the state of Vermont doesn't just go by some of those high-level tests. See, we have a little bit of a different educational model. I know in a lot of states, basically, your attainment, whether you go on to the next grade, everything under the sun relies upon like one big test at the end of the year or every 2 years or something, depending on the state. We don't really do that in the state of Vermont. It's also average grades and everything else. It's not just requisite upon one single test that people take. And it works. Our system does work. I think also the aesthetics of our buildings, honestly, have something to do with our higher educational ranking. I've seen schools in Texas or Florida, and some of them look like penitentiaries. They don't look like schools. They look like, I would take one look at them if they didn't have a sign out front and assume that it was a low-security prison or juvenile detention or something. And that's really what you're training people to do. You're training people to have no appreciation for maybe the finer things in life, and you put them like a cookie dough through these whack-ass school systems, and you try to turn them into cookie-cutter drones, basically. And we take up a slightly different tack than that. There's maybe a bit more critical thinking at the early stages in Vermont's educational system, and it works. The feds don't need to be involved. Screw them. They don't need to know what data we're using because our system simply does work. Now, we pay dearly for it. It's a system that we use certainly isn't cheap. I think ours is the most expensive in the country. We should be looking at Minnesota, too. I think they're number 1 or number 2. Depending on the year, we're competing with like Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Maryland, I think, or some other state. So we should probably take a look at systems that cost a little bit less per capita tax money. Let's see if we can implement them, save people a few bucks. But it does work. We do produce very, very fine scientists and engineers and everything else under the sun. It's just there are no jobs for them in this state. Our big problem is job-related. We have no educational problem whatsoever in this state. The problem is people get a really good education. They're the creme de la creme of the whole country. Everyone wants to hire them, and there's nothing in Vermont can hire them. Those that have actually attained at the highest degree in the state of Vermont, unless they're working at UVM or for IBM, they've probably left the state. So a few dozen people every year maybe stay in state after attaining a very high degree of education. Maybe they go to college here, but then they go somewhere else. That's our problem. We don't have a problem. The feds should take a look at our system and try to mimic aspects of it because it works so much better. Our standards are higher than like the Common Core bullcrap, the No Child Left bullshit. All of those things don't work. Education in this country was better when the states virtually completely controlled it before the federal government got involved anyway. And that's especially prevalent in states that have, consistently for quite some time had very high educational attainment. Why should I care what Uncle Sam's standards are as far as, how are you going to gauge children's success? What, you're trying to make us like one of these prison complex states so that everyone here, they get born, they go to the penitentiary junior, which is elementary school, or it used to be. Then they go to the kind of young adult penitentiary, which is supposedly high school, get in high school. And then they go to the actual prison because, there are no jobs. And then with your standards, they would have a shitty education probably, because the federal government likes to dumb people down, doesn't want people to think critically, certainly doesn't want people to have too much knowledge. You want basically to pick and choose who gets a really good education, and then preclude 90% of the population from that so that they're easily controlled, I guess, because the less literate they are, the easier it is to fool them, to keep them ignorant or something. The federal government is gravely concerned about Vermont's educational system. They're gravely concerned that our number 1 or 2, depending on what year you're asking on, educational attainment isn't good enough. Now we have to bring ourselves down to the 20s or the 30s somewhere in order to appease the federal government. Otherwise, they're going to breathe down our necks and make us fill out all sorts of red tape bullcrap paperwork or something like that. I think the federal government should be as hands-off as it can with education. That includes for states that don't attain as much. One of the reasons that they're having problems is probably the federal government comes and makes it harder for them to actually function. So then they have to have, like, what, an army of lawyers and accountants just to have an educational system. Wonderful. Yeah, it's really cost efficient. And so in some state that has a lackluster economy, yeah, it's going to be a problem. But we've been saved by our small town school style system. The fact we don't have any the significant urban areas, I think, helps. And it just works. So, the federal government should leave us alone because what we're doing is working. You should be taking tips from us, not asking us what we're doing with student data or something like that. Who cares? You're not good at educating people. You want them all to be ignorant. Maybe we're a little bit different here in the wonderful state of Vermont. That's a good thing about Vermont, our educational attainment. I've got plenty of criticism for this state. Education's certainly not one of them. That's about all. Peace out.